One of the biggest misconceptions in leadership is thinking a team is stuck because they're not working hard enough. Now, most of the time, they're working incredibly hard. They're just stuck in the wrong gear. And when I walk into an organization, I'm looking around for just a few observable signs that'll tell me when and where they're stuck. The first is around growth. If the same three people answer every question and everyone else sits there quietly, I know that individualism and self-belief have stalled. The second is engagement. If decisions get made in the meeting, but they're questioned in the hallway, I know people understood the plan, but they never really truly bought into it. The third is acceleration. This one is easy to spot because the calendar is always packed, but the decisions are slow. The team mistakes activity for momentum, and then they spend more time discussing the work than actually doing the work. And then finally, there's risk. If nobody challenges an idea, they're not asking the hard questions, or maybe they don't offer any different perspective, then ownership has disappeared. Silence, a lot of times it looks like alignment, but it's often a sign that people no longer believe in the outcome and it belonging to them. The warning leaders miss most is a full calendar because they assume that busy means productive. But I see it as a signal to ask whether that team is actually moving or just staying occupied. And that's the difference between being busy and being in the right gear. I was recently in a room with a leadership team of a very mature franchise organization, and within the first few minutes, I could tell that they were stuck in the wrong gear. They were really smart, they were experienced, they were genuinely committed to their big brand as well, but nearly every important idea was being discussed as something that they could do next year. And that was the tell. The leadership believed that the team was performing because nobody was openly resisting the changes. Everyone agreed that the ideas were good, the conversations were really positive, and the organization had decades of experience behind it. But agreement without a decision is still hesitation. And that whole mindset of we'll just do it in 2027 had quietly become this comfortable way to avoid changing today. And so when I named it, the room did not become defensive either. They recognized it immediately. Their problem wasn't a lack of talent or effort. They'd become comfortable relying on that playbook that had made them successful before, and while the business all around them was already asking for a different gear. That's why I tell leaders to start listening closely to the time frame that their team uses. Because when every meaningful change belongs to next quarter or next year, you might be looking at a team that sounds aligned but has lost all of its urgency. People always ask me, how do I know if my team is just catching its breath or if we've actually gotten stuck? But the difference is really simple. A pit stop always has a purpose, but a comfort zone doesn't. A team that's recovering can usually tell you exactly what they're preparing for. They know what they're learning, they know what they're improving, and they also know what has to happen before they get back in the race. But a stuck team, they never can seem to answer those same questions. They keep talking about why now isn't the right time, why they need another meeting to discuss a little bit more, or why next quarter would be way better timing for everybody. The one question that every leader should be asking this week to their team, to their organization is, what are we preparing for? And then listen. Because if the room gets really quiet or the answers get really vague, you're probably not in a pit stop anymore. The first sign that a team is starting to get unstuck, it's not always better results, it's better decisions. They stop waiting for perfect certainty, they make the next move, and momentum starts to build again. That's why I always say that comfort zones are pit stops, but they're not where the race is actually won. If you recognize that your team is stuck, your first move should not be just to push everybody harder. It should be to figure out which gear that your team is actually in. One of the biggest mistakes that leaders make is applying all this pressure to a growth problem, more meetings to an engagement problem, or more incentives to a risk problem. The wrong solution just creates more frustration for everybody involved. Because if it's a growth issue, we should be asking, what do we need to be learning right now? If it's engagement, ask, where are we half committed as an organization? If it's about acceleration, ask, what decision needs to be made today? If it's risk, we should be asking, what changes if we don't solve this issue? Those 4 questions will tell you more than another hour-long meeting ever could. And I saw this firsthand with a franchise organization that they realized that they had an acceleration problem. Their calendar was really full, but all the decisions were really slow. And once leadership started shortening that distance between discussion and action, momentum finally started to return. And within about 90 days, they weren't having more meetings. They were making more decisions. They were trying out more ideas, and they were moving faster because they had finally shifted into the right gear. That's why I say we shouldn't be pushing harder until you know what gear we're in. A race car in the wrong gear can have the pedal on the floor and still lose speed. And teams are not much different.